Right, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chair. I do like strong chairs, a good trade union, good things done. I just want to say, please, this is a very good event, and I want to congratulate Democratic Alliance for putting this together, because people from different traditions need to get together to speak, to understand and learn, and come with a narrative that we can both understand and go forward to win this referendum. I want to thank Michael Gold as well, to make my job a whole lot easier. Because what he articulated there was a shop floor view of how working people see the European Union. I'm from Essex, and a lot of workers that I drink with and associate with used to vote Labour, and now they vote UKIP or anything else because they have deep hatred of the European Union. But that's not reflected in the upper echelons of the trade union movement, and that's what I want to address my remarks to, why that is the case. So what I'm covering is the European Union, the Labour movement, social Europe, the social chapter, and TTIP. That's a lot to cover, and I'm not going to do it in an hour, but what I would say, if anyone wants clarification or a question of what I'm saying, say it at the time, because then we can have some sort of dialogue, and you're not listening to me for an hour. Because it's quite complicated and some of it's quite simple. But the first thing I want to say about the European Union is it's very good at presenting itself with whatever it wants for its own purposes, really. And it's like a chameleon, it kind of presents itself as all good things against all bad things. And in the 1970s it was a force for peace. And then we had the Balkans and Ukraine and all the rest of it. So that's not necessarily the truth. Or in the 80s, we had this social Europe, social partnership agenda put forward. And I think I want to deal with a bit of that because it explains why there is this disconnect between the leadership and the trade union movement and its members. And after the fall of the Berlin Wall, of course, it presented itself to Eastern Europe as good, that's right, capitalists. And that's why it gained support. And it's interesting, this week, they are now presenting themselves as environmentalists. Environmentalists for Europe was launched this week by one Mr. Bill Oddie. Quite an unpleasant character. I met him once, and not a very nice man. Apparently the common fisheries policy and the common agricultural policy are good for the environment. And that's another form of a narrative that is just absolute bollocks, as the last speaker put it. I'll nick that off him. So, the EU is a corporate entity that is about big business, and it's about removing democracy from the member states. I just want to start by looking at what a trade union is. A trade union is a national body. They're national bodies by their very nature. They're designed to maintain and improve workers' wages at the workplace, and also to control the where it can, to control the supply of labour, as Michael has pointed out. What the EU does is do the opposite of those two things, and that's what it does very successfully with the free movement of labour and with its economic policies, and indeed by the social Europe agenda itself. And social Europe is an argument that's going to be coming up in the next few months in a big way. Varoufakis, the ex-finance minister of Greece, who wrote the third understanding memorandum of a bailout and then resigned and then enforced it onto the Greek people, is now launching himself as a European-wide group called DM25, which will create a social Europe. So they're reinventing this this fallacy for political gain, and I think that's what we need to understand. And the British TUC is very committed to promoting that fake agenda, as is, in fact, the British Trotskyist movement as well. They're being brought into play. In fact, there's a group called the Alliance for Workers' Liberty. Recently, an article was published said that the unification of Europe under Hitler was objectively progressive. This is the kind of mentality that the EU has managed to drive into the labour movement, and I just want to look at why that is the case. The EU was a Tory project. It is a Tory project. The Tory party took us in 73. Margaret Thatcher campaigned vociferously in 1975, and I've got a document here. There's some spare copies. I brought some because I think it's important to understand. There she is, 1975, with her campaigning to keep Britain in the European Union. In 1979, she implemented, when she got elected, she implemented the free movement of capital and began the process of deindustrialisation of this country. First by attacking the coal industry, and then the steel industry, then the coal industry. This was all a part of a project of deindustrialising the country, and at the same time waged war on the trade union movement, which divided society in a way it had never been divided before. And you can agree with that or not, but it's a fact that millions of trade unionists still feel very strongly about those years, what happened. I was involved with the miners' strike, miners' support groups, and I was involved with the print strike. And by 1986, by 1998, the trade union movement was shackled and very, very demoralised. Margaret Thatcher was just bringing in the Single European Act that gave us the single currency and even the developments towards a militarised European Union. She spent her life as an ardent Euro-federalist. So she wasn't the best person to sell the European Union to the British people. So the European Union came up with, well, Jacques Delors in particular, just at the point when the neoliberal Single European Act was being implemented. He came to the British TUC in Bournemouth and said the European Union was, if not socialist, socially democratic in its arguments, and it would bring full employment, proper trade union rights, and protect public services. A young delegate there in 1988 called Bob Crow, and he didn't believe it, and he said, well, is the class war over? That's finished, is it? It's already given to us. And the delegate sung Frere Jacques to Jacques Delors, a pathetic display of really a paradigm shift where they just believed everything that came from Europe was going to give them everything. And Bob Crow didn't believe it then, and he continued until he died to campaign to expose the reality of what actually the EU was, which was a corporate entity designed to abolish democracy as we know it. It's interesting, they targeted the trade union movement because the trade union movement historically was one of the origins of democracy in the first place. Someone mentioned the Chartists before. It was the 19th century Chartists that asked for parliaments and the universal suffrage and the vote in order to change society for the better, to balance the power from capital to labour. And that was the class struggle at the time, and they created the situation where after the suffragette, the women's got the vote about 100 years ago, and we had democracy. So the trade union movement, and it is quite an important part of society. There are still 6 million trade unionists in this country, and if we need to get them to vote to get out of this European Union, so what we need to do is to stop sort of demonising them and actually understand what is the problem. I think Michael Gove has already articulate what the problem is. But for us, the problem really is the aristocracy of labour, or not the aristocracy, the bureaucracy within the TUC, which is continuing to go down this path of supporting. They've actually campaigned to get this country into the euro without a mandate. It's never been discussed at the TUC, and this is the extent of the disconnect between the memberships of the trade unions and the leaderships. But that's changed because the myth of social Europe, of course, is under a lot of pressure because particularly as a result of the crisis that began in 2008. EU member states are now abolishing collective bargaining as a concept. In Romania, before the bailout, 98% of workers were covered by a collective bargaining agreement. Where people have collective bargaining agreements, they have higher wages. So that where it was 98%, is now something like 24%. It's a 63% drop, purely because the Troika said you cannot have collective bargaining. And this is at the same time as they're claiming that they support a social Europe, so-called. In Greece, if you are a transport worker in Athens and you go on strike, you are automatically conscripted into the army under the fascist rules that were brought in during the fascist regime that fell in 1974. So they're bringing back all these draconian anti-worker issues, despite the idea of social Europe. And we talk to people in the trade union movement, and they say, well, outside of the European Union, we wouldn't have all the things that the European Union does for workers. And really, we just want to spend a bit of time pointing out that the social Europe agenda does not actually defend workers in any meaningful way, and it is actually a lie. Firstly, the social Europe agenda, the Working Time Directive, the Agency Workers Directive. The Working Time Directive, I was a shop steward 30 years ago, and the governors came in and they said, right, we're going to bring in the annualisation of hours. And we had a meeting with the employers, and we said, what does that mean? He said, well, we can phone you up, and you can do 56 hours one week, and you can do 2 hours next. We were powerful at that point, we could stop it. And we said, well, that ain't happening. But today, you can't do that, because the Working Time Directive is actually that. It's actually working hours over a 4-month period, in which you can be brought in for 50 hours one week and 2 hours the next. And that's the effect of the Working Time Directive. But it's also soft law. No member state has ever been prosecuted for breaking the Working Time Directive rules, and there are a number of opt-outs. The other interesting thing is the Agency Workers Directive, and I think what was interesting, someone mentioned Norway earlier on. 2 years ago there was a general strike in Norway, an unofficial general strike, because the government was going to introduce the Agency Workers Directive. So the workers went on strike against the directive. It tells you what the nature of the directive is. The directive actually makes agency work the norm. That's what it's designed to do. It's not designed to defend the agency workers. First of all, it only kicks in after 12 weeks, and most agency workers don't work for longer than 12 weeks with the same employer. And secondly, and most importantly, there's a thing called the Swedish derogation. The Swedish derogation is used aggressively by all the agencies. What it does, if you're directly employed by the agency, then the agency workers and its claimed benefits no longer apply. And that was deliberately put into that to allow the agency workers to be exploited on 0-hour contracts. There are over 1 million people on 0-hour contracts working on 0-hour contracts in this country today. If you're working on 0-hour contracts, you can't get a mortgage. You can't plan for the future. You are basically a reserve army of labour that can be brought in and got rid of whenever you like. The Agency Workers Directive even demands that member states end disproportionate restrictions on agency work. It's interesting, in France and Spain, there's actually a ban on agency workers. Under the Agency Workers Directive, that's illegal. So France and Spain must employ agency workers where it's applied. And with the tendering processes that all member states must use, then obviously the companies can bring in agency workers under the tendering rules. There's also been a number of rulings from the European Court of Justice which highlight that how the internal market, the single market, batters down even minimum trade union standards, one at a national level. So in other words, what the European social model is, it's a way of destroying all the progressive social models that have been brought in since the end of World War II. And in particularly in Sweden, for example, as Michael pointed out, there was Swedish workers were working on a school in Laval, and the company said, right, you're all sacked, we're going to bring in Latvian workers on 1/3 of the wages. And they said, you can't do that. He says, yes we can, because under the treaties we have got freedom of establishment and we can do what we like. They blockaded the building site. The European Court of Justice found against the Building Workers Union. Now, what's interesting about that is it means any other union says you cannot socially dump, you cannot bring in workers on a third of the wages, they say, well, the Laval is there. It's case law. And if you try to stop it, we will sack the lot of you and we will sequestrate all your money. Now, this has already happened. The Air Pilots Union, Balfour, complained that they were bringing in cheap pilots to undercut the wages by 50%. And they had a march, I remember it very well, and then it all went quiet. And the union said, we can't because of Laval. Because they said, we will sequestrate, they'll make it illegal. So it's illegal to defend your living standards at work under EU treaties and under the treaties of the European Court of Justice. There was another case, the Viking case, where Viking, the Finnish ferry company, said, right, all the Finnish were sacked overnight, and they brought in Latvians to work on a third of the wages. The ITF took, the International Transport Federation workers, took the EU to the European Court of Justice, wasted money in my opinion, but there you go, and obviously found in favour of the ferry company, and now the ferry company uses Latvian workers on below the Finnish minimum wage, and that's entirely legal under the freedom of establishment rules. So the ineffectual nature of social Europe is underlined by the fact that even the minimum standards is soft law, which is not used in any meaningful way to defend workers. But what it does do, it gives Polly Toynbee and the Guardian something to wave around and say, oh, outside the EU, workers will be undermined. Workers will have their wages cut. But actually, that's what the EU does very well. And so it creates a fake narrative which millions of people actually believe. And I think social Europe is actually one of the biggest lies, and it's one of the biggest things that's going to allow the yes side to start spouting this nonsense about how much better it is within the European Union. But what's interesting is the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, who are fanatically pro-EU, they're demanding measures now to defend Irish workers. And they, in a press release, I couldn't believe this. It is an iron law of economics that an abundant supply of labour pushes down its cost. It is insulting people's intelligence to pretend otherwise. So they recognise the problem, but they don't recognise the facts that the European Union is actually doing it. Now, the other thing to say about the European social model is that it's actually supported by big business as a fake narrative. The European Roundtable of Industrialists was founded in about 1983. It basically wrote the Single European Act, it wrote the Services Directive, and it had a massive input into all the treaties. And in fact, they've got a website, ert.eu, which is very interesting because they actually boast about the fact that they've done that. They had a Secretary General, his name was Keith Richardson, and he supported the concept of social Europe. And this is what he had to say about it. If politicians feel that it is important to get the chapter referring to the desirability of full employment and they think it will help public opinion, we don't really object, providing of course it remains related to aspirations. So they're saying themselves that it's not true. That was a press release, that was put out in a press release. They actually say, we know it's a load of nonsense, but we're going to carry on saying it. So this is really the problem we're facing, is that, interestingly, the first time I heard the concept that the EU was somehow a communist plot to impose socialism across the EU was from a Tory Eurosceptic, actually. But it's actually the same narrative as the EU is using to saying we are socially progressive, we are progressive people, and we're going to make it better for working people. But of course, since the crisis, that's just not the case. It's not entirely believable anymore. But again, during this campaign, up in the next couple of months, that will be the agenda, to say that it's worse outside because workers get the benefits of this concept of social Europe. We had a very successful fringe meeting actually at the TUC. It was quite interesting. We didn't have any money, so we had quite a long way from the Congress. And 80 people turned up. Now, we've been having fringe meetings at the TUC with about 6 of us for years. And we got absolutely nowhere, all we had was water, And we were competing against, some of the big companies that had food and all the rest. And everyone is in the mood to say, we've had enough of this. We really have got to move forward and start breaking down these ideas. Unfortunately, we lost Tony Benn and Bob Crow, which was actually our kind of, that was a big blow to us. But it's workers that are putting pressure on the unions now that is making the difference, and it is moving, and that's why I want to move on to TTIP. This is really useful pamphlet. Leave.eu just published this. I've only got one copy. This is my filed copies, unfortunately. But I would ask you to look at this. It's called Stop TTIP. Now, it deals with TTIP. It also deals with a number of other treaties that are being brought forward. Now, I don't know how many people know about TTIP in this room. No. Right, okay. Right, it's going to be a harder job than I thought.
I'll give you a hand if you need it.
Yeah, good man. Yeah, TTIP is something else, it really is. Something to behold.
Its correct title's EU, EEA, NAFTA.
No, they've changed the title. That's an interesting point. Thanks for that. It was going to call it AFTA, but there's one reason why they changed it. Because millions of people in North America hate NAFTA so much that they on the connotations between NAFTA and AFTA, and that's why they changed the name. It's now called the Trade and Investment Partnership, and it's been in complete secret.
Transatlantic.
Transatlantic, yes, you got it. That's it. Something like that. Anyway, you read the pamphlet; it's all in here. It's been negotiated in secret. No one is allowed to see the text. The only way you can see the text is if you go into a room with no electronic equipment and with a piece of paper, and you can make notes. And the only people who can do that are selected MEPs. Hopefully you know about it.
Actually,
I've done it.
Right.
Actually, there's a German MP who has just released the text of a large chunk of it.
Yeah.
And she's put at the bottom of it that she got this not from this darkened room.
Well, there you are. But
I only saw this a couple of days ago. Apparently it's still in German, but there is a translation being done.
Well, the Americans in particular are really keen on this to be kept secret. And what's the most interesting thing about it is not about trade. It's nothing to do with trade in particular, because most tariffs have been which are basically taxes, have been so lowered that there's not much left. So all there is barriers to investors' rights. And that's what TTIP does. It defends investors' rights. And there's another treaty called CETA with Canada, which does the same thing. Now, the most important thing to understand about TTIP is the investment calls. This TTIP has been written by the lobbyists from the EU and the US. It's complete lobbyists. There's about 100,000 lobbyists in the United States and about 50,000 in Europe. They have put this together in order to defend investors. When I say investors, I don't mean people who buy £5 shares in British Gas. I'm talking about the big monopoly capital, the big banks. And within the TTIP is a thing called the Investor to State Dispute Settlement, ISDS. These are secret courts. They're already existing. And what they do is they take entire countries to court if they don't acquiesce to what their demands are. Russia has been fined something like 15 billion by 3 members of the Yakos, the Russian oil company. ISDS disputes are going on all the time, and they're rising. In 2014, it was 8 million to 2.5 billion of states giving money to private corporations
for projected losses of profits. Not losses of profits in the past, but projected lost profits. ISDS claims made in 2003 including claims for alleged losses arising from the imposition of levies on solar power plants in the Czech Republic and from the reduction in subsidies for renewable energy. There was a claim of 824 million against Cyprus for increasing its stake in the bank, and so it goes on. ISDS is about corporate power taking public money and directly transferring it into their own coffers. It is an extraordinary document, and there's a massive growing crisis campaign against it. And it's a real problem for the Europhiles, because how can you be pro-EU and against TTIP? Because people in the Labour movement are against TTIP for what it represents, but they still support the European Union, despite the fact it's the European Union that's negotiating this deal, which is a charter for corporate exploitation, really. There's another deal called CETA, which is the Canadian version, which is a lot further down the process of being implemented. And there's also another treaty called the Trading Services Agreement. And this is really about what Michael was talking about before. It's Mode 4. This is about not just the free movement of workers within the European Union, but bringing in workers from the Indian subcontinent. I'm talking about highly educated engineers brought in to do work in the finance sector and in the engineering sector. And you tell people in the city this is coming down the chute. It's not just plumbers that are going to be undercut. This is anyone working in the finance sector. You know, the beating heart of our economy now, it's been deindustrialised, will be run by Indian workers on 6 months contracts, where they can be brought in, sent back, and another lot brought in and sent back. It's an unending supply of labour from India. So you can imagine what that means. It means social dumping will be increased on a massive scale. It won't be just the working class, lower wage, who have been hit in the same way as in the rural economy or in the construction economy. The same process will be going on using not EU labour but Indian labour. And they even helpfully in the treaty, the Trade in Services Treaty, they even list the industries in which Mode 4 must be allowed to be brought in under the Trade and Service. And I'll read out: construction and related engineering services. Number 1, general construction works for building, general construction work for civil engineering, installation and assembly work, building completion and finishing work. And this is the best one. Last one, other. And now you can, environmental services, sewage services, refuse disposal services, sanitation, similar services, other. So any industry, you can bring in Indian workers on 6 months contracts, on 0-hour contracts presumably, and I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to be pushing bits of paper about. I don't know what we're going to be doing, because we're not going to be doing any of the work. And the only way you can stop these treaties is to get out of the European Union. TTIP is the killing ground. If we can get workers to understand the basics of what this is, which is boiling it down to actually getting rid of you and replacing you with cheaper labour, and also getting rid of public services, because the other thing about TTIP, of course, it includes the NHS. Yeah. And the biggest lobbying group in the United States is not the military, it's not education, it's health. That's where the money is. The most investment in this country in public services is health. The second is railways. That's why the EU privatised our railways under EU Directive 91440 in 1994 with John Major. Something that Margaret Thatcher didn't want to do, by the way. So Major was the most right-wing Europhile Prime Minister we've ever seen. And so even if TTIP isn't introduced, it's what the EU wants to do. So we can get into a debate with someone and say, well, TTIP will never go through because there's so much opposition. The point is, it's the flow. You can see what they're trying to do. And it's what all the treaties do. It's what the Lisbon Treaty does. It removes the right of member states to actually do anything. In the same way, it removes the rights trade unions to defend their interests and control the supply of labour. GMB recently, now the GMB have kind of moved massively because British Airways, for instance, all their accounts are done in Scotland. British Airways have told the union, we are bringing in Mode 4 this year, and we're going to bring in Indians on 6 months contracts, and you're all sacked. Now that means GMB, this is the most Europhile union in the labour movement. They're a menace, and now they're saying, well, we can't go along with this. We cannot go along with this. Unison, I mean, their general secretary was a Europhile as well. They've now said we will not support Alan Johnson's campaign to stay in, and I've been asked to speak in next month a Unison regional conference on whether we're to support EU membership or not. I couldn't get into a Unison meeting, let alone speak at it. So things are moving, things are changing, but we need to have a narrative from us, from the left and the right, pointing out what TTIP is. So however right wing you are, however left wing you are, this TTIP is really does expose what we're up against and how serious the situation is. And I think that this is a very brave move by Leave.eu, because as far as I understand, David Cameron supports TTIP, and he said, I'll support it all the way. And now I don't know what UKIP's view is on TTIP. But UKIP...
We vote against it.
Right, okay, well that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So we've got a situation where we're going to have to separate, we have to isolate these people and say TTIP is unacceptable, and we have to link it to the only way to fight TTIP, the only way to fight the common fisheries policy and the common agricultural policy and all the rest of these damaging things. This is worse than all of them put together, because it's not just labour rights, it's environmental standards, it's giving massive powers to lobbying groups who we don't even know the names of. We don't even know who these people are. And I want to leave it there, Chair, because I could go on forever, but I would like to have some questions asked.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. For clarity, you were mentioning that there were already ISDS cases going on at the moment. So is that not part of the TTIP agreement, or did I misunderstand you somewhere along the line, Brian?
No, I will make clarification on that. There's a ISDS. They do exist, but what it will do is formalise it on a global scale. ISDS exists in the NAFTA treaty. That's why one of the reasons why NAFTA is so unpopular. Canada is one of the most sued countries in the world, all done through ISDS. Billions of Canadian dollars have been handed directly to corporations that they feel they couldn't get access to their natural resources. Natural resources was one of the main reasons why Canada has been heavily fined, because it hasn't handed over its vast resources to these private companies. Ecuador has been done with an ISDS fine of $15 billion. But what happens is that the country says, right, what do we do about this? Well, why don't we just change the rules and roll over to these corporations? Then we won't have to pay the $15 billion fine. So what it does, it actually puts down a marker and says, you can either pay the fine or give us what we want, which is in the example of Ecuador, which is obviously the oil in the Amazonian region. And so these big companies are using ISDS already. But if TTIP goes in, they can use it against the NHS, they can use it against any public service.
Can I just add on that? There's a number of these agreements. Now, the Australian Pacific one, the Australian government is being sued under ISDS by Philip Morris, the tobacco manufacturers, to say that having plain packages on cigarettes is costing them a fortune, and they want to be recompensed because the Australian government has done plain packaging on cigarettes.
Thank you very much. I understand that now. Yeah, remember this is clarification questions, political question comes later. Gentleman there first.
where would you be able to find the ISDS claims that you mentioned? Is there like a...
Well, yeah, the War on Want have got a interesting War on Want come out against TTIP, and they've got some excellent material. And the pamphlet from Leave has used a lot of War on Want material. Also, there's a Canadian campaign that's done a lot of work on this because they've suffered so much from it already. But what I'd say War on Want is also no to TTIP website that is
Global Justice has got quite a lot on
Global
it.
Justice is another one, yeah. But it's interesting because War on Want have got this campaign against TTIP, but they're still saying they're still not sure of what they think about the EU membership. So it is wide open.
Sorry,
Just
follow up.
in a kind of strange reversal, if you don't mind, would I be able to ask the UKIP representatives, was there any disagreement within the party about TTIP? That's a sort of strange.
Yeah.
As I said, it was, as we learned more about it, we became more sceptical of it. Of the 22 MEPs, there's one who is very much a free trader. But from what I've learned from you today, it's not, as you said, it's not really about trade and tariffs.
Absolutely, absolutely not.
And thank you, because I've learned that from you. It's something altogether different, which we are now beginning to understand. But we do vote against it when we get the opportunity in the Parliament.
Yeah, this is about monopoly power.
Can I add to that? Look, this is where terminology is terribly important. The first thing is, it's not about leaving Europe, it's about leaving the European Union. The second thing is, the European Union is not a single market or a free trade area, it is a customs union with a common external barrier or tariff. Now the function of TTIP is effectively that one customs union negotiates a massive legal agreement with another customs union. Now, they are not about free trade.
That's right.
They are about, basically, legalised corporatism. And when the relationship between me and Stuart is that I sort of analyse things and then I discuss them with Stuart, we discuss the conclusions. And when we analysed TTIP, we realised that it was nothing to do with free trade, well, not much to do with free trade, and everything to do with legalised corporatism, which is what our speaker has been saying. And that is the mechanism by which UKIP understood it and then moved to a strong anti-TTIP position. And now we are, in the European Parliament, one of the most vocal opponents of TTIP based on that understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman there first, I think it was Mark, and then the lady down there.
Is it not the case that the whole point about TTIP is that it makes the ISDS, that sort of quasi-legal body, the substitute for the country's legal system? So at the moment, if you have this contract dispute, you resolve it in the British courts, and that's the place. Now, what TTIP does is that becomes irrelevant. Everything has to be referred to the ISDS.
Well, okay, can I just, at this point, just say that I want clarification questions, and I'm not quite sure, that might have been a clarification, but it definitely wasn't a question. So, could we stick to try and clarification? No, but can I just say that I want clarification questions to Brian at this stage? We'll take the political discussion in the next session.
Can I ask the audience if they all know what ISDS actually means?
No.
Right, it's investor-state dispute settlement. Right, and an ISDS court is definitely not the British or any national court. It's a bunch of competition lawyers, and there is no right of appeal against their decision.
And they meet in secret.
That's exactly what it is.
The other clarification, Chair, is that what's interesting about ISDS is that they can still go to the national courts as well, at the same time. So they can use the national courts and that influences the ISDS courts as well. So I mean, it's a lawyer's paradise, really.
Yeah.
And
investor-state dispute
Settlement.
settlement.
Okay.
What did they said?
Mark first, and then the lady behind. Yeah. Not you, no. Mark and Denny.
Oh, right, okay. You've done a lot of work establishing or trying to establish that the social charter is now largely a myth. I mean, it's a bit like in the way that there's only 4 sections or something of Magna Carta still on the statute book. But how can you actually communicate this on a much bigger scale to the labour movement? Because Alan Johnson and all these people are going around saying if it wasn't for the social charter, then workers would be in a terrible or a worse state in this country than they are. But what are the actual mechanisms you think by which you can turn this around within the labour movement?
Me and John and others have been fighting a very lone battle for a long time, and you don't get invited to many tea parties if you say you criticise the social. It's not about politics. But the point is that we are working on a pamphlet now, similar to this one, in order to get it out to the labour movement, because it's much easier to argue now that the social chapter and the social Europe doesn't work because of what's gone on in the bailout states, when the attacks on collective bargaining. That's what's going to be hard for Alan Johnson. But what they say, I mean, even the European, our friends in the European TUC admit that. There's a quote from them I've got here. Yeah, I mean, the European TUC is 80% funded by the Commission, by the way, and they actually campaigned for the yes vote of more austerity in Greece. They actually went there and told Greek workers to vote for austerity. That's how rancid they are. And they said that this is a statement from them: cuts in salaries, cuts in public services, and weakening collective bargaining are all on the agenda. Oh, that's all right then. And that's supposed to be representing us. I mean, it is
what the enemy says.
Yeah. So I mean, they are very compromised, put it that way, and they're finding it very difficult. But what happened? There was a paradigm shift in the late 80s in the labour movement, and they're very hard to turn a tanker to turn around because this sloppy ideology. And when you're up against the independent and the Polly Toynbees of this world, constantly telling us how socialist.
Don't have to worry about
Well, well, hopefully, yeah, that'd be right. That'd be right. I mean, actually, the right-wing press have been much better on this stuff than the liberal press on TTIP and the FT, because they don't lie to their shareholders, do they?
Okay, the lady behind Mark and Denny.
I'll just partly answer my question, but not entirely. This is quite a good leaflet.
Thanks.
But it's clearly out of date because of the bit on the back.
Well,
but what are you producing that we ourselves could give out to people who are from the labour movement or very left-wing, shall we say,
yes,
who come to us and say, oh, you're talking rubbish, it's going to ruin our working prospects, etc., etc. We've got to have something to counter that. This would be very good.
Yeah, well, we are doing a new version of that, but we haven't got any money whatsoever. And I think you ask the DM, you ask any other EU group, the funding is very difficult to find. And to believe EU to do this is a very brave thing, because they've sort of broke the dam, I think, with this. But we haven't got much time left. Sorry.
So just a practical question.
Yeah.
You could send the PDF and authorise it.
That PDF is on the website, which is on the pamphlet.
Authorisation to reproduce.
Absolutely, you can do what you like with it. Actually, the Trade Unionists Against EU website has got thousands of articles on it from trade unionists and socialists putting this case of how puerile the social Europe agenda is. There's one on comparing social Europe to a cargo cult. I don't know if you're aware of the cargo cults, where they built airports and sort of towers out of bamboo in the hope that the planes would come. I mean, it is. We have to get through ideologically to convince people that it is actually a myth.
Okay. Yeah, gentlemen.
Just a related point, right? PFI, Private Finance Initiative, it is the case, isn't it, that one of the reasons why we run up such horrendous levels of PFI debt, privatising public services, was actually Labour's attempt to get Britain to join the euro and hit the borrowing requirement. That's another key argument, I think, that probably needs to come out a bit more. That debt comes from the EU at the same time as you're running up the PFI debt, you're bailing the banks out on the other side.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I still forgot the clarification in that one, actually.
Useful point.
The lady here, last question. Lady here.
Corbyn is supposed to be Eurosceptic. What's his opinion on TP?
Right. He's against TTIP. The Parliamentary Labour Party is against TTIP. The Labour Party is against TTIP, as far as I know, but they've got this weird position where suddenly social Europe is going to save us from it. And so there's this, I think that Jeremy Corbyn is not going to fight the EU battle because he can't win it with the Parliamentary Labour Party, but he can on TTIP.
So he might just...
Well, no, he has come out against TTIP, so he has. But how vociferous that is, I don't.
He was very vociferous during the leadership campaign because at all the debates he would bring it up as an issue to bash his three opponents who are all pro-EU. So he used it, I know that from speaking.
Yeah, no, absolutely, no. He was very left wing. Yeah. And that's what I think. That's why he won.
Please note the "was" in this sentence. Yes. All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Brian, for this. That was really good.
Oh,